Thanks for staying with us on Morning Live. Now, the Communication Workers Union, CWU, says that it's facing the South African Post Office, issues facing the South African Post Office, that SAPO includes a whole lot of structural organisational problems, also industry regulation and governance issues. And the union cites the resignation of top executives, which includes the South African Post Office's Chief Financial Officer, who resigned after just 3 months in the job, as evidence that there is a state of decay at the post office, which is making it very difficult to function optimally. Now, Parliament's Standing Committee on Public Accounts, SCOPA, has also expressed concern following the Auditor General's report on the South African Post Office. The Post Office obtained a disclaimer and was found to be commercially insolvent. Now, the group incurred irregular expenditure of over 200 million rand, as well as fruitless and wasteful expenditure exceeding 26 million rand. For more on the latest developments within the Post Office, we join via Zoom now by the new South African Post Office CEO, Nomkhita Mona. Thank you so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you, Sakina, and thank you for having us.
As you can hear from that introduction, Nomkhita, it's a very, very gloomy picture at the South African Post Office, and this is experienced by the South African citizens. But you are only in the job for 10 days now. So let's talk about what you found and how you see some of the major challenges facing the South African Post Office at the moment.
Well, 10 days is not enough time for anybody to make an impression, but it's long enough for me to actually understand what's going on, especially in terms of how I'm doing my first 100 days, in terms of getting into the business, understanding what's going on. So what I have found is an organization that has a lot of challenges that, the public has been told about, but at the same time, it has an equal amount or even more opportunities that we can mine, that we can, harvest so that we can actually take it forward, which is why it was attractive to me.
So let's talk of some of the major challenges that you have identified in these first 10 days in office.
One of the most glaring one for me was that the basics were not in place. So what I mean by basics not in place is that mail is not sorted on time, it's not delivered on time, we're not able to bring in the revenue that we require, etc. But if you look at that, you need to also look on the flip side as to why these things were happening. And that is the first thing. But the second and the biggest one, in fact, is that we have our own expenses far exceed our revenue. The current revenue. But also the main reason is really because we have had a drop of about 50% on our mail revenue, which was traditionally what was holding the post office together. This is as a result of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, and that business is never going to come back. Somebody else was asking me, what do you mean by the pandemic has affected the post office? In two ways, really. Number one, it's because during the lockdown, the hard lockdowns, we couldn't do anything, we couldn't go out, etc., etc. So there was nothing really happening. Then there was also no mail coming in from internationally, etc., for us to sort and take forward. But the biggest impact from the pandemic is that it has sped up the manner in which people are doing the postal services. People are now online, they're digitizing, they're using a lot of e-commerce, etc. So much as we've lost that revenue, it's not going to come back to the post office and not to anybody else. However, it opens up a whole lot of other challenges that we can then go for as the post office.
If one looks at, for example, courier services being provided by the post office and totally being decimated by the competition because the post office has just been ineffective all round, Nomkhita. So how do you address that? Because the competition is quite stiff.
This is true. However, I think the outlook is not bleak, because part of the reason is that the public has lost confidence in us as the post office delivering their goods. Some of the goods get lost. You will not believe how many complaints I've already received in my office since our interview last week at SAFM for people saying my parcel is untraceable and I've been waiting for so long. So that is problem number one. So that's what we, the EXCO, is going to be dealing with directly this morning. We are going to be discussing particularly what to do with whatever is on the floor, all the backlog that's there, but also the new mail that's coming in. So that's one of the issues that we actually need to do. So there's a trust that has been lost in us. So we do need to bring that back. And the only way to bring it back is not by talking about it. It's about doing the things that you are expected to do at the time you are expected to do, and therefore you'd be able to turn around. So the courier industry is one we are eyeing as the post office. We do have the infrastructure. We are doing some courier services currently, but of course we want to grow that segment as well.
So, as you admit, there is a trust deficit between the South African public and the South African Post Office. Staff morale is at an all-time low. And I hear what you say, and I admire your enthusiasm and your optimism at this stage, 10 days into the job. But, of course, you're going to have to deal with those labour issues, and these are long-standing, and you have staff members who are not happy at the moment. How have you dealt with that situation in these first 10 days, and what is your plan going forward?
Well, in my first 10 days, I've already had 2 meetings with the unions. And when I say unions, we have 3 unions that represent workers at the post office. And we invited the leadership from all 3 unions. Firstly, on the day I was being introduced, and I basically kind of told them what my credentials are and how I wish we could work together going forward. And just this past Friday, we spent 2 hours with the leadership, and we were saying to them, this is the situation, because my approach to leadership is about being transparent, being open, being honest, because I view the labor union as leaders as themselves of the constituencies. So it's important with the same information that we have if we hope to fix these problems. So one of the first things I said to the leadership, together with my EXCO, so we had a joint meeting with unions and the EXCO on Friday, and we said to them, this is exactly where we are. Here are the numbers. This is what we owe. This is what we bring in. This is where the problems lie. And from today, well, in fact, I've been visiting some of the mail centers already. I've been to about 3 or 4 of them in my first 10 days. And today we are having a joint meeting again with the union in one of the major centers where we're sorting, because we also need to speak to the employees and explain to them the situation we find ourselves. So your question around the labor issues, also taking into consideration that we have 16,158 employees working for the post office. So that's another challenge on its own, and therefore we are going to be having to work together with the union. And I'm quite positive that we will find each other. I do not expect that we will agree on everything, but at least we'll be talking.
I spoke to Aubrey Shabalala of CWU last week, and he lamented the fact that there were ghost workers possibly in the system. So you're talking about 16,000 workers. He mentioned, I think, a figure of 19,000. Have you been able to take a look at that? What's going on there?
Well, just before I joined, even the minister had spoken to the board, and the minister is bringing in a team of experts for a fixed term, short term, and the terms of reference for that team to work with us, the board and the executive, is to really look at things like that. One of the things that the minister has said was she does need verification as to whether indeed there may be ghost workers in the system or not. So we are indeed working on that. But the number that was given to me by the Human Resources Director is 16,158 at this point.
Nomkhita, obviously the unions are there to look out for the best interest of their members, who one would imagine want an increase. And we heard from the Auditor General's office briefing Parliament that the post office is effectively an insolvent concern. It's commercially insolvent. So looking at the numbers, I would imagine that that's one of the first things you looked at. Tell us a bit about where you think this entity is and where it needs to be, and how do you get there?
Well, in terms of the finances, we are the situation is dire. So that's the first thing we need to say. The current situation is dire. But what makes it even more dire is that there are those statutory payments that we are supposed to be honoring, including a big debt to SARS. And therefore, we need to make sure that we clear those out. I mean, our debt is sitting at over 3 billion currently, and that includes both statutory and our own creditors. And we really would like people to give us a bit more time, and we are engaging them as we go along. I've already engaged about 3 of our main creditors in terms of saying, guys, we had agreed that we would give you this amount by this time. It is impossible at this point. But I will be speaking to the board because I need to make my own submission to the board to say, this is how I believe we should do this, because we do need some kind of assistance, at least in the beginning. In terms of going forward, after we've cleared all the other legacy issues that we found, it would be important for us to actually, we can also become viable financially.
So we're out of time. Just a final question with regard to your turnaround strategy that you obviously have to provide to the board. Does that include the issue of a so-called state bank? Something that has been alluded to in previous State of the Nation addresses by various presidents of this country, also conference resolution of the ANC for a while now, and also the question about closing of post office facilities. And Fabian Watson writes to us and he says, please ask the CEO why they've decided to close post offices in the townships, because now our elderly have to travel for pension. What is the criteria? As in my area, the post office serviced more than 3,000 people who are now struggling. So those 2 questions, the banking side of the institution and also the opening or closing of post office facilities. Nomkhita?
Let me start with Fabian's question. I have asked for a report around all the post offices that have been closed, whether voluntarily or even involuntarily from our side. And we're going to be looking at the matters and the merits of each of those, and we'll be going back to the public to see what we can do. So I have taken note of that question. With respect to the post bank, remember that the post office had nurtured and put a lot of value to the post bank. And as I walked in, there is a process that is underway within the department, which is actually led by the department to commercialize the bank. That's number 1. But also part of this short-term expert team would also be looking at how it is that is going to happen. So in terms of the state bank question, etc., I would rather that the department actually does respond to that question in particular.
And just a quick one on irregular and wasteful expenditure. 200 million rand was reported by the AG's office as irregular expenditure, another 26 million rand in fruitless and wasteful expenditure. The question of the CFO, what is your staff complement at the moment? Do you have a chief financial officer? If not, what is the plan?
We have an acting chief financial officer at this point. We already have a short list on the table, already approved by the minister. The board is now at a point where we have interviews that will be scheduled for the first 2 weeks of May, and we should then finalize that matter with urgency. There is a lot of urgency around it. So that matter has been effectively taken care of.
And I just have to ask, and if you can't give me an answer today, I will give you a pass on this one because you're only 10 days into the job, but I'm hoping that we can speak to you again at a later stage to get an answer to this. If you look at that 226 million rand, and given the service or lack of service that South Africans are receiving from the post office at the moment, I think it's important that we know exactly how the money was spent. So can I perhaps ask you if at this preliminary stage of your tenure as Post Office CEO, you've noticed anything? If not, can I ask you to please go and look into that and perhaps give us an answer at a later stage?
I can say the following. In terms of irregular and fruitless and wasteful expenditure, sometimes it's not that the money has been misused per se. It has been used for the course of business. So that's one. The main thing is a governance issue, that people didn't follow the policies, they didn't follow the PFMA, etc., etc. That report is at my desk as we speak. We are discussing it with the finance team because we want to make sure that going forward, we don't have those issues, because at this point, that's what seems to be the main point about how it is. It's not about where it was used and whether it was stolen or anything. It's really the fact that some people didn't do the 3 quotes, they didn't follow the law, etc., etc. And those are issues that we are already tightening on.
Thank you so much for your time, and great to speak to you. We'll keep in touch. CEO of the South African Post Office, Nomkhita Mona, and as you heard, she's been in the job for only 10 days, but seems to be very clear on the issues bedeviling the post office and what her plans are. And when I spoke to her last week, I said to her, I just hope that whatever afflicted Mark Barnes will not afflict you, but she assures me that she has the support of those higher up. So we'll keep an eye on how the post office develops from here on in. That is where we're going to leave it.